Welcome. Today we are talking about setting healthy boundaries. And I am Angie Stevens. This lovely training is provided to you by the Nebraska Department of Education. And this is a grant funded by the Department of Health and Human Services and SAMHSA. So luckily, this is provided at no cost to you, and hopefully you find some benefit within it. So again, talking about setting healthy boundaries. To start, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Angie Stevens. I am a licensed independent mental health practitioner and clinical social worker, which makes me an LICSW. I know all the letters. I am a mother of four, so I have 4 children, youngest age 3 and 7, then 9 and 16. So my girls are 3 and 7, my boys are 9 and 16. I am also the guardian and conservator to my mother, who is diagnosed with a severe and persistent mental illness. She has paranoid schizophrenia plus bipolar, and I am her guardian. Also a lover of karaoke and board games. So, if you ever need to go sing karaoke, I'm your gal. I have worked for over 20 years in the Omaha area as a school social worker, as a medical social worker. I've worked within the juvenile field, the government field, nonprofit environments. So I've kind of had this well-rounded experience that has helped me in gaining expertise or knowledge. So let's start with the importance of setting boundaries. Boundaries are ways that we define ourselves to others and inform the world of our needs. So it's natural for us to set set boundaries as caregivers, especially when kids are small. It's be sure to hold my hand when you're crossing the street. No, we don't touch hot stoves. We don't put things in light sockets. Take that coin out of your mouth. Those are not toys. Those are breakable. So these are common universal boundaries that I think we don't even think about as boundaries because it's just so natural for us as parents to set those because they are universal in our society. Oops. Boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows me where I end and someone else begins, leading me to a sense of ownership. Knowing what I am to own and take responsibility for gives me freedom. This is one of the benefits of boundaries that I don't think we talk about enough. Sometimes things become enmeshed and we think that boundaries are this, punishment, especially when it comes to our children and setting emotional or, iPad time boundaries, or any boundaries with a partner that it feels like maybe we're punishing them because the partner doesn't agree. But the nice thing is it helps us understand where we end and another person begins. The same thing for our children. The biggest thing about setting healthy boundaries for our kids is it allows for healthy navigation of relationships. It teaches accountability for one's actions. If our kids know where the boundaries lie, then they know when they have crossed them. Therefore, they have to take responsibility for the choices that they have made. It's not on me to take responsibility for every poor choice my child makes, whether that is at home, in the community, or at a friend's house. It encourages respect of self and others. This is huge because if I know that setting a boundary for myself is showing respect for myself, I can then teach that to my children, which therefore they then can start setting those boundaries for themselves as well and showing respect for themselves rather than being taken advantage of. It fosters self-care and self-love, promotes a sense of agency and independence, right? That's ultimately what we want for our kids, is we want them to recognize that they are unique within this world, that they stand alone. Yes, they are part of a family. They are part of this parent-child dynamic, this unit, but they are in and of themselves independent of us as their caregivers. And it increases trust and safety. The language of boundaries. So I don't know about you, but when I went into parenting, I had this idealistic mindset that I was going to be the best parent ever. And then they handed me this baby, and I was like, I'm sorry, you're trusting me with this baby? What? I don't know what I'm doing. Right. But then I thought about, okay, there's so many other parents out there that are keeping kids alive. I can do this. You then compare yourself to Mary Poppins and Eudora from Tiana. Oh my gosh, Tiana, the Princess and the Frog, right? And Fairy Godmother. And you're like, oh, I got this. This is going to be so great. Then reality sets in. And instead, you are confronted with all of your shortcomings as a parent. And I did put all female figures on here, but the same can be often said for fathers too, right? We are confronted with our shortcomings and the ways that we feel that we have failed our children, as though, our own childhood wounds have weaseled their way into even the best intentions that we have. I find myself, acting more like mommy dearest, no more wire hangers, than I do Mary Poppins with the spoonful of sugar, right? But the truth is, we are all guilty of failing to set those healthy boundaries at some point for our kids, whether it is for ourselves or our kids. But that's kind of the gift of a relationship, right? We learn how to interact with each other. We learn where we end by recognizing where somebody else's boundaries are. And sometimes my boundary, if it crosses somebody else's boundary, they then are like, oh, nope, and push my boundary back. And it's that give and take that is that gift of relationships. I wanted to play this video because
Parenting is a language.
What do I mean? She just started. Dr. Becky Kennedy, I have never heard a better explanation of parenting in general, but I feel like it really, really applies to boundary setting as well.
Parenting is a language. What do I mean by that? I will explain, and I promise this metaphor is going to connect so many dots in your brain. Think about the way you were parented. That was the language you learned. Did it involve talking about feelings? Did it involve repair? Did it involve seeing the good kid under the bad behavior? Now think about the language of parenting you want to give your kids. For most of us, we would say it's a different language. Now this helps so much because if you were always spoken to in English and you wanted to teach your kids Mandarin, I think you'd say to yourself, okay, I can do that. Yes, it's hard. And of course, I don't just naturally have Mandarin skills within me to teach my kids Mandarin. I can go find those skills. I can go invest in the right resources so I can learn what I need to learn, so I can teach what I want to teach. But that is not some natural thing that happens. The other thing you would know is in high stress moments, of course you would revert to English, right? You'd be really stressed. You couldn't access the Mandarin. You'd speak English. And then after, I don't think you'd say, oh, I'm the worst parent ever. I'm doing my old thing. I think you'd say, okay, that makes sense. Let me take a deep breath. I can go back to Mandarin right now. This is what it means to be a cycle-breaking parent. This is what you're doing. You are both learning a new language and teaching that new language to your kid at the same time. And you know what that means? You are amazing and you're doing a great job.
I love that video because she's right. We are breaking cycles. We are learning new ways to do things. So as we go through this presentation and I discuss some of the common boundary violations, I want you to, rather than thinking, oh, great, I've screwed that up, I've messed that up, oh, now my kids are going to need therapy. Don't think about it in those terms. Think about it in the terms of, okay, I am just continuously learning new ways. Like Maya Angelou says, do the best you can until you know better and then do better. And the gift of, in Dr. Kennedy's example of resorting back to English in those high stress moments, that then presents another opportunity to apologize to your children, to say, man, I'm so sorry. I resorted back to English in that moment, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted to provide you with Mandarin. And then have that discussion, right? When you cross those boundaries with your child, when you violate those boundaries, have an open discussion about it. That, again, is the gift of that relationship, that give and take. This isn't, we're just teaching and we have to know all the things. Our children are teaching us way more than we are actually teaching them. Let's be honest, right? So let's move into common boundary violations. So some common boundaries include emotional, physical, intellectual, relational. This can also be sexual, and financial. I'm not going to talk about financial, but I will briefly touch on some of the violations that are seen within the other categories. So emotional boundaries. This is probably one of the messiest, the easiest to cross as a parent, and as a child, right? But the messiest to really see. So guilting, right? A lot of times we can guilt our children into being responsible for our own need to be loved, right? For our need for an ally. You see this often in divorce situations, where, it's the child has to pick a side. This creates this pattern of a fear of intimacy, fear of commitment, fear of showing up. The biggest solution for this is connect to your own personal sense of safety and security. We see this a lot, especially if you have experienced trauma. If you had a parent or a caregiver that didn't show up for you in the ways that you needed, right? You might then become that caregiver that is, okay, well, you need to show up for me, because you're almost trying to fill a void. So connecting to your personal sense of safety and security helps you notice that you are loved and that you have that inner ally. It's you that is unsurpassed at supporting you. When you are really grounded, your children are free to hate you and love you according to what's going on within them. So when your child is like, I hate you, I can't even tell you how many times I've heard that. Not taking it personal. Your child is not responsible for always loving you. Minimizing children's emotions. We see this a lot, or at least historically, in men. Don't cry, rub some dirt on it. Men have been expected, little boys have been expected to put themselves in a box, right? Don't be a pussy, right? These are things that you always hear, that have historically created these men who are unable to share their emotions. They are very confused in regards to what they're truly feeling. They've learned to suppress their emotions in order to get love, or create very unhappy relationships, work life, and it can even come up somatically with illness within our body, right? That anxiety that you feel because I can't express, I can't unleash my emotions, so I now am internalizing and I feel all the things. Solution to this is often letting your kids feel what they need to feel. And that is really difficult, especially in public environments. I have had my children throw huge tantrums at the grocery store, at the gas station, at the theme park. It doesn't matter. And it is embarrassing because we feel it is a reflection of our parenting. We have to work really hard to let that go. It is a reflection of our children's ability to process their emotion. And so often, more often than not, it is age appropriate, right? I used to say, I am a mental health therapist. My kids should know how to handle difficult emotions. What the F is happening, right? And then it dawned on me one day, I am a mental health therapist. Therefore, I allow my children to fully express their emotions. So the fact that my child is tantruming or is, feeling safe enough to argue with me about whatever it is, whatever boundary I have set, is actually healthy. It doesn't mean that I have failed as a parent. In fact, means I have succeeded. So it's important to really reframe and look at what it is that we're actually trying to teach. Manipulation, making your children responsible for your emotions. You are making me angry. If you want mommy to be happy, you will eat all of your dinner. you hurt my feelings because you weren't listening to me. So this one's kind of dicey because I think it's important to let your children know when they have crossed that limit. Like, yes, I am unhappy right now. I am feeling overwhelmed and stressed because I have explained to you several times the expectation, and you have continued to cross my boundary in whatever way. You've continued to sit on my lap, or you've chosen to hit me, or whatever that boundary is. Doing that is healthy if you are not putting it back on your child and making it so that they are responsible for you, making it so that they are codependent upon that you are codependent upon their reaction, right? You are the one responsible for your emotions. They are not meant to hold that for you. Physical boundaries. These are a lot easier, right? That personal space, the physical touch, hovering or helicopter parenting, discipline, you know, that helicopter parent that has to always watch over and almost dictate or decide everything for that child. Or physical touch. Sometimes people don't like touch. Or you can even talk about, you know, that the discipline of physical touch, spanking, slapping, you know, anything that creates fear rather than a sense of love and nurturing. And a lot of times these are tough. Again, it's that language piece of, well, I was spanked and I turned out fine. But research has shown that that is not effective. That fear tactic, it just creates a child that is afraid to do something, not a child that knows the benefit of choosing the alternative, right? And it's not a child that has learned how to create a healthy boundary. That is a child that has learned how to play the game and not get physically assaulted. There's a big difference. Personal space, this is one that's kind of even tough for me. You know, I recently, without realizing it in the moment, violated my 16-year-old's personal space. He had engaged in some sort of questionable behavior that led me to go through his room to ensure his safety, right? And it's difficult because as a parent, he's in my house, so I want to ensure that he is making safe choices. But it's also tough because I shouldn't, without his knowledge, just violate his personal space. I have to believe that I have instilled enough of that trust and safety within our relationship that he can come to me with concerns or with any need that he has. I had to apologize. I had to say, you know what? I am not proud. I violated your space. But now let's talk about what I found. Okay. So there is sometimes it gets a little murky. It's tough to really know which way is right and which way is wrong, especially when it comes to some of those boundaries that aren't set within society. Intellectual boundaries, screen time, screen time, screen time, screen time, limit, 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 limit. I've had students who were given unlimited access to electronics because, you know, otherwise they would throw a tantrum. And so the parent just gave in rather than creating that boundary. I have actually done, side note, an experiment with my own kids where I have given them free reign of YouTube and iPad time, kids YouTube, right? I have then given them 1 hour of YouTube and iPad time. I have then given them iPad time without kids YouTube. And what I have found, at least within my own experiment, is my kids were unable to emotionally regulate when they watched kids YouTube. It didn't matter if it was an hour, it didn't matter if it was all day. I don't know what it is, but somehow they could no longer see themselves as individual within their life. It's almost like they were an observer of their life. I can't explain it any other way. All I can say is setting those boundaries are very important. Schooling. As a school social worker, I noticed how powerful the influence of parents on a child's desire to show respect, listen, and learn in the classroom. I also witnessed the brilliance of children in furthering this divide to their benefit, right? A child might say they felt targeted by a teacher because they were given a difficult assignment, resulting in the caregiver either verbally attacking the teacher or allowing the child to remain home, getting to play video games, right? Either way, the child was attempting to control the situation to get out of an unfavorable task. It doesn't matter what you say, Miss Stevens, because my mom will believe me and let me do whatever I want, kind of became that mindset. So I think the solution to that is recognizing that kids are really good at also getting what they want. And the boundary within that should be I and the teacher will always communicate. Now, ultimately, I know that there are teachers out there that don't always have the best intentions with students. I also know there are kids out there that are really, really, really good at getting out of anything difficult. Okay. So having that conversation between parent and teacher is crucial. Also, homework time, setting aside that time for homework. Intellectual boundaries also are values and beliefs. It's natural for children to see the world through the eyes of their caregiver. And we want them to believe what we believe, right? Because we have adopted these values and beliefs for a reason. But I just want you to take 1 second and think, has there or are there any values or beliefs that you currently hold that your parents or caregivers didn't agree with or didn't hold? That separation of parent and child, your children watch you and they want to share your values and beliefs, but they are also independent. So allowing that boundary to move one way or another is important. And it's also important to be aware of what your boundary or what your beliefs and values are, because your children are always watching. Children aren't born to see the divisions in the world that the rest of us have been programmed to see. So being mindful of the boundaries with which your children are allowed in your adult conversations, or the boundaries with which you are having adult conversations. Sarcasm is a big one. Children don't understand, they don't naturally understand sarcasm. So when you are presenting them with a sarcastic comment, they are literal loosies. They take it as you say it. They don't always understand. And relationship boundaries. So there can be that codependence of I need you, you need me. I feel you, you feel me. As a parent, yes, our children, they provide such a benefit to us, but they should not be responsible for filling our cup. We have to have those adult relationships. If you aren't having those adult relationships, then you need to start looking for those. You need an adult friend or, partner who's on your wavelength that you can confide in. Because when you don't have that, sometimes that results in oversharing, discussing your intimate and private lives in detail with your kids. I hate my boss. He's an ass and he treats me like dirt. Your grandmother's crazy. She and her husband can go to hell. These are not conversations that should be had. Those are crossing boundaries with your child that is dependent on the adults to feel safe in their world, right? You might have an issue with grandma, but your child might not. And grandma might be fantastic with them. But then by crossing that boundary, you have then presented this child with this dilemma. well, mom hates grandma or can't stand her, but I love grandma. I don't know what to do in this scenario. And this then can go all the way to bashing. And you see this a lot in divorce situations where one parent bashes another. Your dad can't ever show up on time. Your mom is always talking smack about me, and she never saw the benefits. She doesn't pay attention, or don't pay attention to what she says. She's insane, right? These again put children in uncomfortable situations. These are violating their boundaries. Moving on to some common misconceptions. A common misunderstanding about boundaries is that someone else is crossing them. One of the most important parts of boundary work is understanding that you are responsible for holding your boundaries with someone else. Your boundaries are yours to keep, communicate, and honor. I think this is so common in the parent-child relationship. We feel that our boundaries are being crossed. My kids, I just can't get anything done. They are constantly needing something from me. They're always begging for this or begging for that, or I'm just exhausted. It isn't on our children to set that boundary. It is on us. The truth about setting boundaries is it's hard. We might find ourselves emotionally dysregulated after a day of chaos and organization, or we might avoid setting boundaries because our kids are emotionally dysregulated and they throw tantrums. So, fine, do whatever. Setting boundaries can feel uncomfortable, disconcerting, and it can be disappointing for both you and the person receiving it. And if you happen to be as much of a people pleaser as I have found myself to be, then it's even more difficult because I don't want to disappoint you. Because if I've disappointed you, then I'm disappointing. But that's not the case, especially when it comes to boundaries. And so it's super important for us to recognize that these are common misconceptions. We never hesitate to tell our kids to eat vegetables and their fruits because they're healthy. We never hesitate to say, no, you can't have candy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner because it's unhealthy. Those are boundaries that are not questioned because they aren't boundaries that I personally had to set. They are societal boundaries. A doctor told me that that is healthy. So it's easier for me to set that boundary. If I'm disappointing you, it's not really me disappointing you. It's the doctors. It's the science. It's the broccoli. It's different when it is a boundary of an emotional limit or a physical limit. So no, I can't hold you right now. I am too upset to hug you. My 7-year-old loves to push those limits and then become hysterical. And I'm like a teapot, short and stout, and I'm about to explode. And I have to go take a moment. And in that exact moment, when I'm like, she's like, the last thing I want to do is give her a hug in that moment. So I had to recognize this dynamic between us because I started giving her those hugs and I would just, and it was a half-hearted hug and I hated it because I was angry. I was upset at the way she had behaved and the way she had treated me. So I had to start recognizing, no, you cannot have a hug in this moment. I need to cool down. I will come back and give you a hug. I cannot right now. And it was disappointing for her. But I knew I couldn't regulate if I gave her that hug. And I also would feel icky if I gave her a half-hearted hug because she was dysregulated. I wanted to give her a full hug and help ground her, but I couldn't because we had gone too far in that moment. So that was a boundary I had to set. It's all about that balancing act, right? We can't be too rigid with our boundaries because that can cause problems, but we also can't be too open and, just free with our boundaries because that creates chaos and suffering. It can be really hard to separate those feelings of like, I'm concerned for my child and I want to provide them care, but I also don't want to make this a codependent relationship. I want to teach them to think for themselves and to be independent, but I also have to create these guidelines and show them the right way or the healthy way to move forward. It's so hard to become or to be that parent that remains loving without completely engulfing the child and becoming consumed. Like, how do you do that? But what's most important for us as parents is to just be aware of how tough this is, aware of our own needs, aware of our tendencies towards tipping the scale one way or another. Once we're aware, we can then begin to implement changes. I'll give you an example. Putting my child to bed used to be one of my favorite activities. Snuggles, tickles, lullabies, connection. It was that feel-safe moment that I desired for my children. Yet over the years and several children later, it became exhausting. It became this hour-long affair that after an entire day of dealing with Stewie Griffin, mommy, I've had it. I don't want it anymore. I just want 5 minutes of peace and quiet without having to act as referee, teacher, therapist, drill sergeant, psychopath, or Mary freaking Poppins shoving a goddamn spoonful of sugar down their throats because the doctor said that it's for their own good, right? I just couldn't take it anymore. But then enters the familiar mom guilt. They're only young for so long, it's not their fault that they just want to love you and want to be near you. Yeah, I know. But I can't continue to burn the candle at both ends. I need time to myself too, You sounding real selfish right now, Angie. Gonna be honest. So then I go in there and I spend an hour singing, tickling, negotiating, threatening, cuddling. It's exhausting. In an attempt to complain with a friend of mine about the differences between men and women, because I was frustrated with my husband at bedtime, right? And how how they respond differently to the needs of children. I was confronted by, let's just say I was both confronted and enlightened in a way that I was completely unprepared for. She said, Angie, do you think perhaps the reason you struggle to set boundaries at bedtime for yourself is due to your childhood? I mean, everything stems from childhood, doesn't it? But how do you specifically mean? I couldn't figure it out. I was loving my children. I was providing care for them. I was engaging with them. It was exhausting for me, right? But isn't that what parenting is? She said, well, I mean, you didn't exactly have consistency in caregiving, let alone bedtime from ages 0 to 5, right? It would make sense you'd feel guilty for not providing what you so desired as a young child. It would also make sense that you'd struggle to create boundaries surrounding bedtime when you were never taught them in the first place and put yourself to bed more than you can count. Holy moly. I hadn't even considered that. For so many of us, we fail to assign boundaries because of trauma or because of our own unmet needs at some point in our life that leads us to, this people-pleasing mentality. I spent my childhood very disappointed not having anyone spend time and love me and put me to bed. So here I am overcompensating for that and not wanting to even dare disappoint my children with it, feeling guilty every time I needed to disappoint them with it. To the point that I was then giving and giving and giving and had nothing left to give. The problem was I saw my children as an extension of myself rather than seeing them as completely independent. My lack of being put to bed was not their lack. They can learn to handle disappointment, just as I had learned. It doesn't have to be the same disappointment, but it's our job as caregivers to look closely at those struggles. Something that causes us to feel depleted or exhausted is something we need to look at, because our kids are mirrors. They aren't an extension of us, but they are little mirrors reflecting back to us all of the faults and holes within ourselves that we are ignoring or we don't see. When we aren't clear on our own boundaries, we invite anyone to come in and take whatever they'd like. Think of your boundaries as a house. Are you just going to open your house and let anybody come in and take whatever they want, whenever, because they want it? No. Yet we do emotionally within ourselves. We give a piece of ourselves, and we give and we give and we give and we give until there's nothing left. And unfortunately, what we have done is teach our children that that is healthy, that they need to give and give and give and give and give until there's nothing left. That's love. So what do we do with this? What are some helpful next steps? For your children, step 1, pre-teach and get down on their level. This requires us to know, or at least have an idea of a boundary that we are wanting to set. This, if we take a moment to stop and truly think, okay, if this, then that. If my child does this, then the consequence will be that. If you can start working through either within your own mind or with your partner or with a friend or a therapist, those if-thens, you will be better prepared for that pre-teaching. If we go into this grocery store and you ask me for candy because we are not buying any candy, then the next time mom goes to the grocery store, you will not be allowed to come. That is a boundary, and it is a logical and natural consequence. But getting down on your child's level and explaining it in an age-appropriate way. Sometimes, because our kids act like mini adults, we talk to them like mini adults. But it is important to remember that they are children. Clearly communicate your expectation and be realistic and as specific as possible. I need you to clean up your toys, because once you clean up your toys, then we can go to the park. If you choose to not clean up your toys, then we aren't going to be able to go to the park this afternoon. Clearly communicating. But in order to create that expectation, my child has to know how to clean up their toys. This might be different. Some parents, it might literally just be picking them up and throwing them in a basket. To other parents, the expectation might be, nope, you have to put the blocks in the blocks basket, the dolls in the doll basket, and I want it all, the baskets then put back in your room. If that is your expectation, then that has to be very clear to your child. You can't say, clean up your toys, or you don't get to go to the park, and your child has no idea what that means. They picked up all the toys, put them in a basket, and then you say, well, you didn't pick up your toys. Well, but they did. They just didn't do it in the way that you wanted them to do it. And so I think at least what I have found, what's so important with this is walking them through this the first couple times. It's like the old adage of clean your room, right? Okay. Well, you know what my kids do when I say that? They put all of their laundry that has been on the floor, that they have tried on or that fell off their hanger, in the dirty laundry basket. And they shove all of the things on their floor in the closet or underneath their bed. Now, is that what I mean when I say clean your room? Nope. But I wasn't clear. I didn't walk them through that. Okay. You see the difference. Golden rule, speak as calmly and unemotionally as possible. Boy, is that one hard. I'm telling you. I am a Scorpio. I am very passionate. And this is one that I have to often check within myself. I have to go take moments. I have to breathe. I have to ground myself because I can lose it. And then I have to apologize if I do, right? But when you're losing it, your children are no longer hearing it. They are now in defense mode. They're not really processing this if then situation. And be patient. Your kids are still learning. You know, I see that you put all the toys in the basket. Thank you so much. Actually, I really wanted them separated. So can I show you how? Can we do this together and turn it into a game so that you then can still go to the park because they did what you asked, but you're also teaching for the next time so that the expectations are clear. Step 3, suggest something that they can do instead. An example I heard recently was, you know, if a child wants to use your curtains as, you know, rip your curtains down to use them as a cape. You know, hey, the curtains are not for playing. What if I get you a sheet? You could use a sheet instead, right? You can offer that alternative. Or you could even say, curtains aren't for playing, but can you think of anything else that we might use that could be a cape? This then promotes problem solving for your child, which is huge because then the next time your child is presented with a, nope, can't do that, they can problem solve their way out of it. Life skills. Restate and remind them of the rule and the consequences. In doing this, it then makes your child responsible for their actions. Remember, if you choose to not clean up your toys, we're not going to be able to go to the park this afternoon. So I encourage you to clean up your toys. You have until this amount of time. Follow through with your consequences. One of the biggest faults, I hesitate to use that word, but it's when emotions get involved, we often make unrealistic consequences. And this is why the if then is so important, because it's really important to apply the logical and natural consequence for the behavior, not the emotional consequence that we are that we're just throwing out there out of, you know, anger. Don't threaten to not take the kids to grandma's house if you need grandma to babysit for you so that you can go to this event, unless you're willing to skip that event. You know, you can't threaten, if you don't put your iPad away now, it's gone forever, unless you are willing to truly take away the iPad forever. Clean your room now, or you're going to be grounded for 6 months. The consequence doesn't really match the behavior. And are you willing to truly hold them accountable for that consequence for 6 months? The problem that we run into when we make those empty threats is then the children learn because we realize, that was a silly threat. And then we go back on it. So the children find loopholes. They are masters at finding holes within our statements. We don't want that. So making sure that you have a logical consequence. Your children are going to become upset and tantrum. You have to try to not be emotionally triggered. This becomes really, really difficult when your child has crossed a boundary that you didn't even know was a boundary that needed to be set. You're like, no, we don't color on the curtains. What? No, the ornaments on the tree are not for playing. They're not toys, as you have broken ornaments all over, right? So you want to provide a consequence for that. But when you are in that moment, sometimes it is too difficult to provide a logical and natural consequence until you've been really practicing this. So one of the things I like to use in this situation is a love and logic model. The behavior you've chosen is unacceptable, and there's going to be a consequence. I need time to think about an appropriate consequence for the choice that you've made. I can't right now. I am too upset. I promise you, once I've made that decision, I will let you know right away. This buys you time, but you're also saying, this is a boundary that has been crossed and there will be a consequence for it. I just need time. I like to use that one a lot. Your kids will then take this as an opportunity to argue with you, but mom, but. And you might get to that, but just what is my concept? Just tell me what I did, right? Another love and logic little tip that I like to have in my back pocket is, I love you too much to argue. I love you too much to argue about this right now. I love you too much to argue about this right now. I love you too much to argue. I love you too much to argue. I hear you, but I love you too much to argue. It becomes annoying and repetitive. Your kids will eventually stop. Ugh, and they'll go storm off. Now, the nice thing about providing a consequence later is sometimes the torture of waiting for that consequence and not knowing what it is consequence enough. Just saying. Remind them that they had a choice in how they behaved. If your child chooses to not pick up the toy, so now you can't go to the park, they're going to be upset. I can see that you're really upset about not being able to go to the park. But remember, I told you that if you cleaned up all of your toys, we could go. And then you chose not to clean them up. So that means that we can't go to the park this afternoon. It is okay to comfort your child through this disappointment and frustration. That does not mean that you need to change the boundary. Consistency is key because you are teaching them how to handle disappointment. Another huge thing with this is acknowledging the behavior and the choices that you like. Praise, 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 and be specific. Oh my gosh, I love that even though you were upset and didn't want to tidy up your toys, you then turned around and you chose to do it. And you did it in such an organized fashion. I love that. Way to go. Or, hey, I noticed that your sister drew on your really important paper and you didn't get really upset with her. You calmly respected that it was a boundary crossed. You told her, no, I didn't like that. And then you took time away to go handle your emotions. I am so proud of you. That is amazing. Praise, praise, praise. Our children want to please us. If we praise the behavior that we want, hopefully we will get, fingers crossed, right? Hopefully we will get more and more and more of that. Ultimately, we need to learn how to handle our own frustration and disappointment. But we can't learn that if our boundaries shift every time we have a negative response. You have to do what you say and you have to say what you mean. If I cross this boundary and you give me a consequence that is I'm grounded for the rest of my life. How can I handle the big feeling that I have with that if that boundary shifts, if that consequence shifts? If you say no, stick to it. Eventually, your child will learn that you mean what you say. So they won't test those boundaries as much. If you happen to live in a household such as mine, like bedtime, where there hasn't really been much of a boundary and it's just kind of been this wishy-washy mom guilt boundary, this is going to take a lot of work, a lot of repetition, a lot of sticking to what you say. And it's not going to be easy, parents. I'm sorry. It won't, because your kids are going to push and push and push and push and push because they are used to the way things were. So you have to really set your intention and be prepared for that. When you are prepared for that, it's like being prepared for battle. You go in with all the tools. You're like, oh, I got this. I love you too much to argue. Sorry, that's what I said. This is the new expectation. I love you too much to argue. Sorry. These are your choices. I gave you an opportunity, right? You have all the tools. You mean what you say, and you say what you mean. Some helpful tricks, something that helps me when speaking to my kids, because sometimes, again, we think that they are an extension of us. So our dialogue with them might sound similar to the dialogue we have with ourselves. And there is no bigger bully in our life than ourself, right? Speak to your child as you would your best friend, your colleague, your neighbor, your sibling. I mean, obviously pick someone you like, but speak to them in the way you would speak to another, not in the way you would speak to yourself. Ugh, you are so annoying. I can't stand this. I told you what my expectation was. Why can't you ever respect that? That is a conversation we would have in our own mind to ourselves. But when we are talking about a 3-year-old child who is not capable of understanding that they have crossed that boundary that you have just now set, that they are not prepared for, that they have crossed many, many times without consequence. If it is a 3-year-old neighbor's kid, you're going to have a lot more patience and you're going to speak more on their level, explaining, holding space for disappointment, but being firm and consistent than you would yourself, right? And focus on the long-term goals, not the short-term benefit. What are you teaching your children? Yes, it's bedtime. Doesn't seem like a big deal. But what I am teaching them is I am independent of them. I also need to take space for myself. Just because they want me in every moment doesn't mean that they get me. So then when they become parents, they also know how to set those healthy limits. They know how to show up and be there when necessary, and they know how to take time for themselves when necessary. One of the easiest examples of this is, parenting date night. I've had several of my friends say, well, I can't leave my kid. It's too hard for them. They get too upset when they're a baby or when they're a toddler when I leave. So we just can't go on dates. My argument to that is, well, but I am teaching my child how to handle disappointment when mom's not there. I am teaching them how to deal with another caregiver that is different than me. I am teaching them how to be independent from me. I'm also teaching them the importance of self-care and self-love. Helpful next steps for you. Release the guilt. That's the biggest takeaway from this. Release that mom guilt, dad guilt, whatever that is. Again, with fruits and veggies, we don't hesitate to push those onto our kids. We dismiss our child's disappointment because we know it's the right choice, but we struggle when it comes to other boundaries. The nature of being human is there isn't a hard and fast rule for emotional boundaries, for some physical boundaries, for intellectual boundaries, relationship boundaries. What I expect in a relationship is much different than what another person might expect. And that's what we run into when we create new friendships, when we create new partnerships. Unfortunately, with that parent-child relationship, it isn't seen in that same regard because we don't really get that choice often. I'm your parent, whether I want to be or not. I don't get to be like, you cross that boundary. I'm no longer going to have this friendship. I'm no longer going to be married to you. It's different, but it's still uniquely personal. So we have to be okay in setting this. Research shows that children learn best by watching. So how better to teach them how to set healthy boundaries than by modeling it? So release that guilt when you are modeling it. Some tips in setting healthy boundaries: start your day with limit setting intentions. One thing that I like to do is when I would go to work as a school social worker, I would wake up and for me, it was a percentage. I am really tired today. I woke up several times in the night for a crying baby who was sick. I'm exhausted. I just don't have the ability to really hold as much space as I have in the past for some of my students. So I'm functioning at a 30% today. So in knowing that about myself, I knew what I could take on realistically and what I couldn't. Now, the day didn't always present that way. If a child was presented with, a possible abuse situation, I had to show up in those moments, and I could. But if there was a situation where a child just needed to, complain about the teacher because they do this all the time, and I know this about this kid, and I know the kid's going to be okay, that's something that I could potentially push off to the next day when I am showing up at 90%. So setting your day with intentions, acknowledge what you gain by setting boundaries, remembering that long-term benefit. What are your priorities? Communicate directly, clearly, and often. In order for me to communicate my boundaries, I have to know where my boundaries end and where they begin. So you have to take time to recognize this for yourself. What are your needs? And start small. You're not just going to turn around tomorrow and suddenly be drill sergeant, Mary Poppins hybrid in your household. It's not going to happen. You have to start small. You have to give yourself grace. Practice self-compassion. When you give yourself grace for being human, you're also teaching your children to give themselves grace. You honor your boundaries. You teach them how to honor their boundaries. When I apologize for crossing their boundaries, when I apologize for losing my temper, when I apologize for breaking a promise unintentionally, I am showing my kids that A, I am human, and B, it's okay to make mistakes, but C, it's also okay to be vulnerable enough to apologize for that, because the relationship matters enough between you and I. And no one is more forgiving than young children. So with that, I just want to thank you so much for attending today's training of setting healthy boundaries. I hope that you gained some skills, some tricks, some techniques that perhaps will help you moving forward. But mostly, I hope that you leave recognizing that you are incredible and you are doing amazing. And there isn't a handbook on parenting that just miraculously makes it easy. Every kid is unique. Every parent is unique. Every situation is unique. This is the beauty of life, but this is also the most difficult part is there isn't hard and fast rules, especially when it comes to setting boundaries. So when you think of what is it that you need and what is it that you are wanting to teach your children for them being an adult. You don't want to have that kid who, you know, quits a job or loses their temper on their boss because their boss told them no or required them to, do something that was a little bit harder than what they, wanted to do because they just didn't feel like it. You don't want a kid who can't handle that because you were too afraid to have them sit in disappointment as a child. So thinking about what it is you're wanting to teach long term will help you create those boundaries. What it is that you're wanting for yourself long term in the relationships that you find yourself in will help you to create those boundaries around yourself. Just remember, you're doing amazing things and you've got this. And if you don't mind, taking this brief survey would be really, really helpful for me to know, what I can do better, and, what I did that was helpful or said that was helpful or most meaningful, so that I can continue moving forward, providing these trainings. So thank you so much. I send you so much love from one mom to another. Thank you.